They laughed at my car. Not a polite chuckle, not an awkward smile. I mean full room laughter. Someone pointed, someone mocked the sound of my engine, and someone I hadn't seen in a decade looked straight at me and said, "Oh wow, you're still driving that thing?" And in that moment, they thought they understood everything about me. They were wrong, because that laughter, it wasn't about a car. It was about a story they had been telling themselves for years. A story where I was the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who always paid but never arrived in anything impressive. They thought they knew exactly where my life ended. What they didn't know was that the car was a choice, and the truth was already waiting inside that building. Have you ever noticed how people treat you differently when they think you have nothing? How laughter gets louder, advice gets condescending, and pity disguises itself as concern. That oil stain on the driveway? To them, it explained my entire life. Failure, lack, someone who never quite made it. But here's what hurts the most. These weren't strangers. This was family, friends, people who benefited from me, while quietly looking down on me. And here's the part you need to stay for. I didn't correct them. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain a single thing. I just smiled, locked the car, and walked inside. Because what happened next is the exact moment the room went silent. Before I tell you what they saw when I walked in, if you've ever been underestimated, laughed at, or quietly used by people who thought you'd always stay small, make sure you subscribe. Like this video if you believe success doesn't owe anyone an explanation, and share this with someone who needs a reminder. You don't have to look successful to be winning. Because when they realized who I was, what I owned, and why I still drove that car, the laughter stopped. Someone dropped a glass, someone whispered my name, and one person, who had laughed the loudest, asked me a question I'll never forget. And that is where this story really begins. They laughed at my rusty car. Not the quiet kind of laugh you might get from an old college friend who recognizes the years on your bumper and smiles for the memory. This was the loud, full-room laugh, the kind that lands like a slap. Someone pointed. Someone else imitated the rattle when I idled at a stoplight. A woman I hadn't seen in 10 years said with careful pity, "Oh, are you still driving that thing?" And the room brightened with other people's amusement. The oil stain on the driveway smelled like everything they thought they knew about me. Lack, failure, a life that could be explained by the peeling paint on a sedan. I stood there with my keys in my hand and the truth pressed under my ribs. The truth that their laughter was not about a car, but about a story they had told themselves for years. They had an explanation for my life that let them feel comfortable. Claire is the one who pays for things. Claire is the dependable one. Claire arrives in a car like that because she is, in soft whispers, still the family bank. It was a hot summer evening. The smell of barbecue mixed with the more immediate perfume of human judgment. People I'd grown up with, people who knew the name of my first dog, and who had once borrowed a lawnmower and never returned it, suddenly had enough distance to perform a verdict. I could feel their eyes move over me like a measuring tape. They saw rust and assumed they knew the story. What they didn't see, the thing they never bothered to ask about, was that the rust was a small, honest thing on the outside of a life I'd been quietly underwriting for years. If you've ever been taken for granted, if there's a corner of your life where kindness became an expectation, stay with me. Because the thing people don't understand is that being the fixer in a family isn't glamorous. It's not scenes from a movie where a rich aunt swoops in with a check and a smile. It's repetition. It's small transfers that add up, automatic payments you set up because someone begged, a text that says, "Please, just this once," and the once becomes a habit. My ledger began as kindness and folded into obligation. It started innocently enough. My brother missed rent a few times during grad school. I covered him. My father had a car emergency that came out of nowhere. I wired him gas money and a deposit for a mechanic. I thought of those wires as loans. I thought of them as temporary. I told myself the usual justifications. Family helps family. You can afford it. It's nothing compared to what they did for you when you were a kid. For months, those rationalizations matched the receipts in my inbox. What compiled into a pattern was less a sequence of dramatic bailouts and more an accumulation of tiny rescues. A $200 wire here, an emergency transfer of $1,000 there. Auto pays for a streaming service I'd never watched, but that my mother insisted doubled as family movie night. I paid a mortgage payment once when their bank had threatened late fees, because the co-borrower line on a document had my name on it, and the lender emails pinged my account with language that sounded like an urgent request from the universe. I'd take screenshots, forward them to myself, then tack them into a folder labeled Family Payments, a folder I never meant to become a ledger of my life. The receipts multiplied. My inbox became a breadcrumb trail. PayPal confirmations, Zelle notifications, bank emails with transaction IDs, and the occasional paper receipt stuffed into an envelope. I started a spreadsheet, at first to keep myself sane, then to be accountable to myself. The spreadsheet had columns that read like the chapters of a slow drain. Date, amount, purpose, recipient, notes. Some lines were boring. Gas, utilities. Some were heartbreaking. Doctor copay for mom, loan for loan. Every time I added a line, I felt both frustrated and strangely proud. It was as if proof could sanctify the frustration. Proof did more than sanctify. It made the imbalance visible. The first time I lay those pages out, metaphorically and literally, was because I had reached a limit, not of money, but of psychic space. The tipping point wasn't a single wire or an abandoned loan. It was the moment I realized I could predict my father's next emergency with the same accuracy as the weather app. The next text could be a temper tantrum, a plea, or a demand, and I'd react because I had for so long. I was predictable, and predictability is currency to people who have learned they can take your compassion and spend it without recourse. I'd been bankrolled into invisibility. The doorway where they laughed was not the end of things. It was a punctuation mark. The sentence had been written for years, but something in me rewrote the next line that night. I did not confront them then. My hands didn't tremble, and I didn't fling the spreadsheet across the buffet table. I was too practiced at soft exits. Public confrontations were not my thing. Instead, I smiled, a small, contained thing, and left the joke in the air the way one leaves a bad television show playing at low volume. But that night, in a cheap motel room a half hour from my childhood home, I pulled out my laptop and opened that spreadsheet again. I worked in a kind of organized fury. Numbers blurred as the cheap hotel lamp hummed, but the pattern that had been fuzzy before snapped into something crisp. There was a mosaic, 365 entries over 5 years, most under the radar, some obvious, some disguised as family help. When I filtered for recurring payees, the top names weren't institutions. They were people I had invoked love for. The totals were round and blunt, tens of thousands over years. I printed the top sheets, each page a small accusation that I had to make to myself before it could be made to anyone else. The next morning, I called a financial advisor. I remember the conversation the way you remember the moment you decide to stop smoking or to leave an abusive job. Simple, practical, and terrifying. I told the advisor what I had done and what I wanted to stop. She listened, asked precise questions about co-borrower positions and autopays, and then said 3 words that, to someone at my level of exhaustion, sounded like liberation. Document everything. Pause payments. There it was, the permission I didn't know I needed. Consult a professional, she said, and the world aligns around that counsel. She didn't promise miracles. She warned about potential backlash. She asked me if I was prepared for the emotional cost. I told her I had no appetite for being the family ATM anymore. Her first practical suggestion, and I'm paraphrasing, was to think of this as disentanglement, not punishment. That word reframed the plan. I wasn't cutting people off. I was taking my name off the line of fire. The advisor reminded me to ask for written agreements, to make phone calls that could later be documented, and crucially, to prepare for the social consequences. They might be angry, embarrassed, vindictive. People who have benefited from your silence tend not to like the sound of it when it stops. I took a breath at that desk. This is the part that still makes me feel righteous, and I started to act. The first real move was administrative and boring in the best way. I went through my online bank account and canceled the autopays that skimmed my checking account every month and mailed away like clockwork. I changed passwords I'd been lazy about. I called the credit card company where my name was tied to a joint account, explained that I wanted to close my access, And after long holds and a sense that I was rattling some machine that had never been asked to work for someone like me before, I filed the forms. I told the advisor every step I was taking. She helped me draft a simple repayment agreement for the larger sums, language that was firm but not vengeful, an installment outline, amount, due date, consequences if the plan was not honored. It felt odd to be both mother and banker, but also strangely honest. I was asking for what was mine. I invited them to see the ledger, not as a trap, but as transparency. I sent a printout to my brother with an email that read something like, "I've compiled everything I've covered over the last 5 years. This is a request to formalize repayment." The email was clinical. That was on purpose. I did not want melodrama. I wanted facts. People respond poorly to emotional accusation. They respond to evidence. The reaction was what you might expect. There was surprise, then defensive anger, then an attempt to recast things as affection. My father's first message was performative outrage. He wrote in a public post that I had cut them off and painted himself with the broad, victimizing strokes he knew would attract sympathy. The brother shot back with a message claiming I had always had money, which, if you were being charitable, was a strange version of, "You don't understand." My mother texted a pleading heart emoji and a message that said simply, "Please don't do this to us." She meant vulnerability. I read it as fear of consequences she'd never considered. Phone calls started to come in, not to me, but to people I knew. Mutual friends weirdly began to ask me if I was sure. It was as if an invisible ledger had been keeping track of social currency, and now, with my numbers out in the open, people were choosing sides. That felt isolating in ways money alone never had. I began to recognize the shape of loneliness. It is a silence that arrives when the world decides you're a problem. And yet, there was a quiet relief that unfurled beneath that loneliness. For the first time in years, I could imagine a small apartment where my name sat on the lease without someone else's shadow hovering at the edge of the rent check. I signed a lease on a one-bedroom condo that was nothing glamorous. White walls, a particularly persistent squeak in the bedroom window that the landlord promised to fix eventually. But it was wholly mine. I walked through it with the keys clutched and felt ridiculous and triumphant in equal measure. I bought a secondhand lamp and a plant I named to make myself laugh. That plant lived for 3 months and then twice as long as I expected, which felt like a minor miracle. The fallout, when it came, did not look like a movie. There were no dramatic confrontations on the front lawn. There were instead inconvenient letters from banks to their address, notices about late payments, and a handwritten eviction notice taped to the brother's door that someone later texted me in a small private photograph. Repossession hums were real for them. I received a forwarded email from a lender with somber wording that suggested long-term consequences. Guilt gnawed at me. Had I been too strict? Could I have done this differently? But the advisor's voice echoed, "Prepare for consequences. It's part of disentanglement." Social media became a theater where our family story was told poorly and loudly. My father wrote long posts painting himself as abandoned. My brother made vague references to family betrayal, and people I barely knew weighed in, offering the kind of moralizing advice that is always louder than nuance. Comments streamed in like rain. Some were merciful, mostly from people who'd been in my shoes. Others were cruel. For a while, the internet felt like a town square where my life was being judged by someone who'd never held the receipts. In the quiet of my new living room, with a thrift store lamp casting a circle of soft light across my spreadsheet, I allowed myself to grieve. I had lost illusions. The idea that love and obligation are the same. The belief that my generosity was always recognized as generosity. I mourned the easy dinners I'd miss. The holidays where my mother would put something on the table she'd never otherwise have been able to buy. I mourned the loneliness of being judged by people who'd been the recipients of my help without ever seeing how it had cost me. But grief is not a straight line. It interleaves with small triumphs. In the months after I stopped funding the family's lifestyle, I took micro moves that were not flashy but were necessary. I sat down with a professional to map out a personal budget, and it felt less like the arithmetic of scarcity and more like the architecture of a life I wanted to keep. I closed accounts that made me vulnerable. I moved money into an account that had my name and my name alone. And I began to invest, not in ways that make good headlines, but in ways that allowed compound interest to do the patient work we all wish could be overnight magic. Investment was a dull, disciplined act. Small monthly transfers, a habit more than a gamble. I also took a scary, brave leap. I started a small side business. This is the point where people lean forward, waiting for the Cinderella story. I make space for that because it was one part hustle among many, and not the single miraculous pivot. I had an idea that grew out of my work, a modest software tool that helped small local businesses automate appointment reminders. I built it nights and weekends, dragging myself across long days where freelancing covered the rent, and the app was a hope that was often imprecise and thin. It took 3 years of scrappy growth, always in debt to coffee and late nights, before it began to pay me in a way that made me less anxious about the next bank statement. When the product got traction, it didn't explode overnight. A community clinic adopted it and referred other clinics. A small dental office praised it online, and someone found that post. The revenues were slow but steady. I reinvested everything back into the company, learned to hire slowly, and learned to say no to investors who wanted to speed things up before it was ready. The first time I paid myself a salary that felt like breathing room, I cried in my kitchen over a takeaway burger and called my friend Emma and said, "You won't believe how adult this feels." Emma, who had watched the long arc, said, "You deserve this quiet win." Eventually there was an exit. Not the kind in glossy magazines, but a solid acquisition from a regional SaaS company who wanted our product integrated into their suite. The sale was tidy, utterly disproportionate to my expectations, and frankly, a little bewildering. It didn't turn me into a character on a finance channel. It turned me into someone who could make decisions without counting pennies every morning. People started using words like exit in casual conversation, as if that one verb could erase 5 years of spreadsheets and lonely decisions. I deposited the proceeds in sensible places, met with a fiduciary advisor, and diversified. I will not list my net worth because that's not the point, and besides, numbers in the end are shadows on a page. The point is that I crossed a line from being financially vulnerable to being, in a way I'd never been before, secure. That security changed my relationship with the family. For a while, it only changed mine. I could have used the sale as weaponry. I could have gone back and screamed numbers into faces. But the advisor's voice, always practical, always measured, reminded me that dignity is not transactional. I held on to that. I let the money do what money does. It removed compulsion. I wasn't compelled to keep bailing them out. I was able to set boundaries because my life didn't depend on their good behavior. My mother reacted first. She was the softest of the three of them, the one who had, over the years, asked me for help in ways that were more curious than entitled. When the letters from lenders and the repossession notices arrived at their house, the pattern of begging shifted. I started receiving texts that were thinly veiled apologies. A small handwriting photo of a cardboard box marked books came through with the caption, "Selling some things. We'll figure it out." It was humility, but tentative and heavy. She came to my condo one afternoon with her hair pulled back, delivering a small wrapped box that contained a pair of earrings she had found at a yard sale, and an apology she had practiced on her drive over. Her hands trembled. We spoke like adults for the first time in a long time, with the ledger not as a weapon but as an artifact I could show her to explain my choice. She cried, not for the money, but for the rupture she had contributed to. She said, "I'm sorry," and the words landed in me like rain on dry soil. I accepted her apology with a guarded grace. I took the hug she offered. I did not cash the small check she insisted on giving me. She was proud to do it, a small gesture of restitution. Instead, I tucked it into a drawer beside the plant that had outlived my expectations, a relic of a repair that was more about recognition than about balance sheets. They were not all reconciliations. My father went through a period of performative grievance, long Facebook posts that painted our relationship in cinematic strokes of betrayal. My brother oscillated between embarrassment and anger. But the distance created room for new kinds of interactions. My mother's softening was not an erasure of the past, but a quiet recalibration. It was enough for me to know that the human heart could still bend. A year later, I received an invitation to the reunion. It arrived in the mail. Yes, actual paper, an old-fashioned touch that felt like nostalgia made physical. The card was glossy, embossed with the name of the country club where our town's social life went to be retouched. The wording was neutral. "We invite you to our annual neighborhood reunion." There was an RSVP line and a handwritten note from one of the old friends, a person whose parents had once borrowed my dad's power tools, saying, "We'd love to see you." Seeing the invitation felt like standing at the edge of a platform before a dive. Part of me wanted to fold the card and slide it into an envelope addressed to oblivion. Another part imagined the scene where I would return in the same battered car and they'd gasp at how I'd rebuilt myself from rust and wire. I debated going and not going for a long time. The reunion was a small-town ritual, the kind of event where somebody wore the same floral dress yearly, where photos were taken by people who still thought film mattered, where reputations were rewoven over tiny plates of shrimp and trays of toothsome appetizers. There was the risk of the same laughter, the echo of that doorway mockery. There was also, importantly, the possibility of closure. I had spent so much time making peace with distance, but I also planned something else. I had been working on a quiet, deliberate reveal, not to humiliate anyone, but to offer a truth I had been carrying in silence. I planned this reveal the way one prepares for a violin recital, carefully with a focus on timing and the exact moment the bow must touch the string. It was not about the car I would arrive in. It was, to be honest, partly a flourish. People remember images. If the first time they met me, I'd been standing next to a rusty bumper, then the second time they met me, I was going to control the image. But I also would not allow the image to substitute for the truth. The reveal would include the ledger, the same spreadsheet that had saved me, and a concise story about the choices I'd made. I would not go to the reunion to gloat. I'd go to make the right thing visible. There was a logistical comedy in my planning. My sense of justice is not always tasteful. I considered arriving in a car that made a statement, a tasteful, perhaps theatrical upgrade to counterpoint the memory of the rust. I thought of doing it quietly. A polished sedan with soft leather. Nothing ostentatious, just a visible contrast. I tried on outfits in my head, like armor or like costumes for a play. The friend who had watched my climb, Emma, rolled her eyes at my ideas and said, "Whatever you do, don't weaponize your success." That line became a compass. Dignity over spectacle, clarity over vengeance. There's a peculiarity about preparing to show people their errors. You have to prepare for your own feelings too. Pride and fear have a cousinly relationship. They show up at the same time to the party. I practiced the lines, I would say. I wrote a concise narrative on my phone that listed the core facts, the transfers, the timeline, the choices made. I rehearsed taking out my phone, scrolling to a screenshot that showed a long list of transfers and the dates beside them. I didn't plan to fling it at anyone. I planned to lay it down like a book on a table and say, in a voice that would be steady and not performative, "This is what I've done, this is why I've done it, this is why I won't resume it." The week before the reunion, there were small tremors of the old dynamics. My father posted an old photo of him and me, the kind of nostalgic one where you both look softer in the face, captioned, "Missing the old days." It read like a plea. I saw it and felt that old familiar ache. But there were also messages of curiosity from people who had heard whispers of my little company and its odd success. People texted, "Heard about the app, proud of you." The town had a mixed response. That was always a certainty. The difference between then and now was that the mixed response no longer dictated my emotional weather. 2 days before the event, a relative called to ask if I was coming. The voice on the other end was not accusatory, but tentative. "We haven't seen you in a while," she said. "It'd be nice." There was an implicit question. "Are you coming to accept or to condemn?" I answered honestly. "I'm coming to be seen for who I am now," I said. It felt like a small surrender. I also felt like I had the right to be seen on terms I chose. The night before the reunion, I packed the evidence. Everything was ironically mundane. A printed page with the ledger sections that mattered, a few bank emails PDF'd into a folder on my phone, and a humble one-page statement I had written explaining my decisions without editorial flourish. No accusations, no threats, just facts, and an invitation to understand. I told Emma that if anyone tried to make a scene, I would leave. I would not add fuel to their defense mechanisms. I would be the adult. Then I slept badly and dreamt of the rusty bumper laughing without a face. Dawn felt like a dare. On the morning of the reunion, I stepped outside with the keys in my hand. My car at the time was functional, not glossy. Safe, comfortable, the honest middle ground I'd lived in for a long time. I had not, in the way movies might suggest, bought a gold-plated vanity to humiliate anyone. I had a plan and a presence. As I locked the door, I realized the weight of what I was about to do. I was returning to a room where the story about me had been told for years. I had an opportunity to alter that story, or at least to add a chapter they would have to reckon with. When I pulled up to the country club that afternoon, I felt the familiar quickness in my throat that comes before you tell a difficult truth in public. The drive was short, and for a moment I considered turning around. But every step I had taken in the past 2 years, closing accounts, building the app, moving into a space of my own, had been taken in a direction that led me here. I could let them enjoy their comfortable narrative, or I could hand them a different piece of paper. The lot was full of cars that smelled of cologne and pine trees. Laughter threaded the air. People held plates. The memory of that first laugh, the jolt that had started everything, was a physical ache in my stomach. I parked, nearly forgetting the small printed copy of the ledger tucked into the glove compartment. I took it with me when I got out, feeling ridiculous and quietly prepared, like someone carrying a hard-won map. At the edge of the steps, I paused and breathed. Part of me wanted to be softer, to accept whatever narrative they wanted to hold. The other part, stronger from the discipline of slow work, knew that if I didn't speak now, I'd have to carve out that truth again later. The room was a small amphitheater of lives that had continued without me. I smoothed the front of my dress, not that it mattered, but small rituals steadied me. I rehearsed the opening line in my head and stepped toward the door. Inside, the same small gossip engines were in motion. The woman with the floral dress scanned the room and fixed an expression of polite surprise when she saw me. A few people who knew me smiled, genuine and surprised. A cluster of older neighbors watched with the indulgent caution reserved for someone they considered a story. And then, as I stepped into the foyer, I heard someone laugh. It was quiet at first, a reflexive exhale of amusement, but I felt its echo tug at the place where the old fear lived. I could have let it wash over me. I could have taken my ledger out in the parking lot and mailed it to everyone as a manifesto. Instead, I walked in, an ordinary person with a not-so-ordinary truth. I placed a hand on the back of a chair and felt the grain of wood, like the story of a life, marked but solid. Then I saw him, my brother, surrounded by friends, telling the story he'd been telling for months. He looked up, and his eyes shifted from surprise to a guarded, petty flair I recognized. He mouthed something, an indistinct sound that felt, in my memory, like the echo of that earlier laugh. This is where, right here, the story tightens. This is where choices meet consequences, not in broad sweeps, but in the way someone looks at you across a crowded room. I moved through people with the ledger in my bag. People commented on my outfit, in that curious way people do when they're trying to reconcile an old narrative with a new image. A man I hadn't spoken to since high school extended his hand and used the name we'd had before we all grew into the stories we told about each other. I felt prepared. I also felt something I'll admit without pride. A hunger for acknowledgement. Not for apologies, not for social media praise, but for simple recognition. To have people see me and recognize that their version of me had been partial and often convenient. I did not expect fireworks. I did not go for spectacle. I went so that the evidence I had kept for years would have the dignity of being spoken aloud if necessary. I had rehearsed a single, clear sentence. If you ever wonder why I set the boundaries I did, here is the truth. I pictured pulling the ledger out, laying it on the buffet table like a book. I imagined the room quieting because people, when faced with documentation, find it harder to indulge their narratives. As I reached where my brother stood, I could see him sizing me up. The conversation that would follow would not be easy. I knew it might not be spoken aloud at all. Sometimes the most significant moments are the ones where silence sits heavy between two people. I am not a person who seeks spectacle for its own sake, but I had a plan, and I had the quiet courage that had taken years to cultivate. And then, I reached for my phone to pull up the top sheet of the spreadsheet to show a few entries that would make the ledger concrete, when someone I trusted tugged my sleeve and said very softly, "Not here. Are you sure you want to do this in front of everyone?" Her voice was a tether. She had watched my long, patient rebuilding. Emma was a living reminder that dignity is sometimes discretion. In that split second, I had a choice: to perform truth like a theater piece or to shape it like a conversation. My fingers hovered over the screen. The rust on that old car flashed in my mind. Small, honest, not the whole story. And I realized the reveal could be gentle without being less true. I smiled, closed my phone, and slid the ledger back into my bag. The room kept laughing, and the same people who had reduced me to a joke still did not know the full measure of my years. But that night, in the small, crowded room at the country club, I made a different kind of decision. I would not allow them to define the arc of my life by a single item of visible evidence. I would not let their laughter be the final word. I moved through the room like a person who had learned how to hold both boundaries and compassion. I greeted people with a calm I had earned. When my brother caught my eye, I did not mouth a retort. I nodded. In that nod, there was 1,000 tiny conversations, an ending and a beginning braided together. As the evening unwound, people drifted toward the bar and toward old jokes. I thought of the ledger tucked away and of the many ways the truth can be given, loudly or in a quiet, indisputable way later. I had chosen the latter. I could feel the gravity of the moment shifting inside me, less a theatrical reveal, more a settling of accounts within myself. When I left that night, I did not drive back in a triumphant parade. I walked to my car and slid in. The engine started without a rattle. For the first time in years, the sound of my own vehicle matched the sound of my life inside. Steady, contained, reliable. The rust, if you looked for it, was still there on the old commuter, but it no longer carried the weight of what they thought it represented. On the drive home, I thought of the ledger sitting in my bag, of the polite but awkward smiles, and of my brother's face, an expression I could not yet read for remorse or resentment. I thought of the other invitations in town. The world had witnessed me as a joke and as something more in the span of a few hours. That is always a dizzying kind of currency. There are many ways a story can end. For me, that night was not an ending. It was an inflection point. I had moved from being a woman who paid for people's comfort to someone who insisted on being paid back in recognition, if not in cash. I had, through slow work, created room in my life for choices. I had not closed the book on the family, far from it. I had opened a new chapter that would require patience, negotiation, and the occasional heartbreak. The ledger had been my map. The reunion, my test. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment under the streetlight. The leaves whispered. I opened the passenger door, took out the ledger, and held the pages in my hands, as if they were proof not that I had been right, but that I had been honest. The decision I would have to make next swam up in my thoughts. How public should the truth be? How wide should the circle of those who knew be? And how much of my life would I trade for the private satisfaction of being vindicated? I folded the top page, slid it back into the bag, and turned off the engine. The car's headlights blinked once and then went dark. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. 3 words, like a small stone dropped into a long pond. Can we talk? I walked into my condo and stood for a long moment in the doorway. The plant by the lamp leaned toward the light in a stubborn, slow bloom. I set the bag on the table, brewed myself a cup of tea, and sat. The ledger lay like a quiet authority on the coffee table. The reunion had not been the final act, only another line in a long letter. I had not arrived at vindication. I had reached a point of agency. Outside, the town hummed with all the easy assumptions that had once boxed me in. Inside, I had the receipts and the small domestic proofs that I had built a life the hard way. There was no gloating in that. There was a peaceful, stubborn satisfaction. I had learned to love myself by refusing to be spent. And now, with the ledger folded beneath my hand, I knew the next steps would require courage that was quieter than a headline and braver than a punchline. The phone buzzed against my palm like a small, insistent drum. My mother's 3 words, "Can we talk?" felt at once ordinary and enormous. I stared at them for a long time, then texted back, "Yes? When?" I wrote it like someone offering an appointment. The truth is, after everything that had happened, conversation felt like a negotiated thing. I wanted to make room for it, but not let it be a theater for old patterns. She came that afternoon with 2 paper bags and a hands-on apology that still felt rehearsed in the edges, her voice catching on the word sorry, the way someone might catch on a low branch. We sat on my couch amid the thrifted lamp and the plant whose stubborn life had become an emblem. She unfolded a story I'd heard before. Small humiliations. Pride turned inward. Then a slow realization as letters arrived, and calls from creditors became a daily shadow. She cried about not wanting to be a burden. I listened to how humility had finally arrived as consequence rather than insight. Her apology was not a magic eraser. It was a recognition. "You didn't have to do all that for us," she said, looking at my hands folded around a cup of tea like a talisman. "I chose to," I said, and spoke next the sentence that would become a minor liturgy in the next few years. "But I also choose the terms." It was not a dramatic proclamation. It was a boundary stated in the tones of ordinary speech. We talked about the ledger, not as a tool of accusation, but as evidence that showed the shape of our choices. I explained simply that my help had always had limits, and that when I asked for repayment, it wasn't punishment. It was restoration of balance. She slid a small check across my coffee table, nothing that would pay for a home, but a gesture of facing the facts. She wanted to cash it. I told her I would hold it for now, and that in time, if repair continued, we would figure out what to do with it. She nodded, and when she left, I felt both lighter and more exposed. Reconciliation is slow work. It does not arrive in single scenes. When the pieces finally began to settle, life took on a rhythm that was less dramatic than profound. I returned to the business with a steadier hand. The months that followed were a long stitch of decisions. Hiring carefully, learning to delegate, saying no to expansion pitches that felt like promises of tomorrow at the cost of my calm today. My company grew in a modest, durable way. Steady customers, steady cash flow, and slowly the anxiety that had lived in the back of my throat for years dissolved into a different kind of planning. I met with financial professionals who helped me structure protections I had not known were possible. I learned to hold money with the same care I had once given to paying other people's bills. There is a peculiar freedom that comes with no longer being the only one who can keep others afloat. It changes your sleep. It changes the kinds of invitations you accept. I began to travel for work in a way I never had, speaking at small conferences and meeting other women who had also learned how to extract themselves from emotional economies that treated generosity as an obligation. Those conversations were balm. They taught me that the ledger I had kept was not a peculiar eccentricity, but a useful map for many people who lived inside the expectation that care always required sacrifice. My father's posts continued to punctuate the timeline, long-winded updates that played the same notes of tragic abandonment. My brother, whose situation had suffered the most real consequences, waded through the fallout with varying degrees of grace. There were repossession notices, eventually a bankruptcy filing that would take years to untangle, and the slow collapse of the easy life he'd been allowed to live on other people's promises. I never took pleasure in his fall, only a sorrow that felt like a taut wire, regret for what had led us there, relief that I no longer carried the weight of his choices, and compassion for his children who were caught in adult mistakes. Boundaries, I learned, can look like exile from one angle and like lifelines from another. Time, as it often does, complicated the neat divisions. My mother, over months and then years, kept showing up in small ways. Texts that said, "I'm proud of you," and lunches that felt less transactional and more human. She sold a few things, found odd jobs for short stints, and began to understand something about pride and repair. The check she had pressed into my hand the day she visited sat in a drawer for a long time, an artifact rather than a monetary fix. When she finally offered to help with a small idea I had for a community scholarship fund, an idea I'd had because part of my story felt still like I owed something to the town, I saw an arc of giving that was different from the old pattern. She was participating now on my terms. Several years after I'd first printed the ledger in that motel room, the company reached a point where an acquisition was possible. It wasn't the cinematic exit some people imagine. There were long negotiations, a lot of due diligence, and nights where I lay awake imagining worst-case scenarios. But the deal closed. It changed what I could do in practical ways. I had safety for the first time that wasn't theoretical, a margin that allowed me to think beyond month-to-month calculations. I didn't shout the amount into the world. I sat with a fiduciary, signed sensible documents, and made plans that fit my temperament. Conservative investments, some philanthropic seed money, and a small but persistent stipend to support my own life without strings. I have never been a person who wears money like a loud coat. For me, the real change was internal. The quiet knowledge that my labor and my risks had tangible payoff, and that I would no longer be coerced by need into roles that compromised my dignity. It is why I never wanted to weaponize the sale against the people who had once depended on me. Dignity, again, was the rubric. I could have publicly flaunted numbers, posted screenshots of transactions, or used wealth as a weapon. Instead, I used it as currency for autonomy. I paid off old debts I'd carried alone, set up supports for my nieces and nephews that respected parenting boundaries, and seeded a small community fund focused on adult education and emergency grants for people who had found themselves in the kinds of holes my family had dug themselves into. Word traveled in a slow, interesting way. My neighbor, who frequented the town blog, posted a piece about a local founder who'd funded a scholarship. Someone in my hometown paper wrote a profile that placed me in the sentence, "local entrepreneur," without the soap opera details the clicky corners of the internet love. A friend sent me a screenshot of a headline, "Local Founders Exit Sparks Philanthropic Push." I laughed because I could, and thought of the old joke about the rusty bumper. Somewhere along the line, people began to attach shorthand to my name. You know how gossip works. It likes tidy verbs. Exit makes a story concise. Billionaire, when it first swirled around in whispers, was shorthand too. An exaggerated way some people in town described success when they wanted to make sense of it quickly. I will say plainly, I never claimed that label as a literal status. I never put a number on my life in the public way the tabloids do. But I also understood what the label did. It flattened a complex path into a single dazzling image, and images are powerful. That shorthand would, in time, become the framing for the second reunion. A few years after the first event, after the sale, after the slow, careful rebuilding, I received another invitation. The card felt different this time. The country club's yearly ritual had become an event the town used to calibrate itself, and my name in the roster felt like a small historical correction. Some people who had once laughed now sent notes that were curious rather than derisive. There was, too, a new cohort in town who had only ever known me as the woman who funded a little scholarship, and who occasionally put up panels at the library. I felt both fatigued and oddly exhilarated. Could I go back to a room that had once defined me by a rusted bumper and be simply the whole embodied person I had become? Planning for this reunion was different. The stakes felt heavier but quieter, because now I was less interested in changing their minds than in staying true to the way I wanted my life to feel. Emma, who had been a steady witness across years of frayed decisions and small triumphs, texted me a single sentence that would become my mantra: "Let your presence be your testimony." I held on to that as one might hold a candle in a windy room. On the day of the reunion, I chose clothes the way I choose punctuation, deliberately. Nothing was extravagant in the way you see in movies. No conspicuous logos or ostentatious jewels. I wanted elegance without spectacle. My car that day was new to the town's eye, a sleek, quietly appointed sedan that hummed rather than shouted its arrival. Some people would later say I drove up in a car that screamed success. Others, those who had met the me behind closed doors, would call it merely sensible. Either way, the point was not the car. The point was how I moved. I stepped out of the vehicle, shoulders steady, hands relaxed, and felt an odd rush of a childish sort, the knowledge that they remembered the old story and that now I was offering a different one. Inside the country club, the room had the same scent of rich hors d'oeuvres and perfume. Conversations swelled like a tide. People looked as they always do, and then tried to reconcile memory with reality. There was a small ripple of comment. "She looks great." And then the soft buzz of curiosity settled over the room. I had prepared a short statement, because after years of carrying truths around in my bag, I've learned the virtue of concise clarity. But I also wanted to avoid making the evening about me alone. Instead, I structured what I had to say like a small gift to the town, a brief public recognition of what had been hard, and then an invitation into something that could be useful for others. I took the microphone, an ordinary podium at the club, and spoke as I had rehearsed, but without the formality of a staged confession. "I've been in rooms like this where my life was narrated by other people," I said. "Tonight, I want to say thank you for the lessons, and then I want to do something different." I told the condensed version of the ledger story. No specifics about amounts, nothing that would feel like a financial spectacle. And then I announced a fund I'd seeded for adult education and emergency grants for parents in tight spots. It was a practical thing, but it also carried a symbolic correction. Money used to keep people dependent would now be used to give them tools to stand. The applause that followed was polite and then generous, and a few faces in the crowd shifted in ways I recognized. Surprise, the old discomfort of recalibration, a dawning awareness that I had become something different. But what people remember most from that night, the image that attached to the headline people in town passed around, was not only the fund or the speech. It was a detail I had not anticipated as important. The composed way I walked, the unhurried smile I offered, the fact that I had arrived on terms I chose. Someone in the back whispered, perhaps in jest and perhaps in awe, "She's like a billionaire." It traveled like a mote of light. The label stuck as shorthand. For some, it was literal, and for others, it was metaphor. I never corrected every whisper. Sometimes the best truth is the one that people can use to make sense of their own discomfort. Later, as the crowd dispersed, my brother found me near the exit. He was smaller in the way grief and shame make people smaller, but when he looked at me, there was something in his eyes. Remorse, maybe, or the simple clarity of recognition. We spoke in the low, halting way siblings speak when the long and complicated ledger of a shared life comes due. He said softly, "I'm sorry." It was not a full apology. Apologies are rarely finished in single sentences. But it was a start. For the first time in years, our conversation did not circle back into the old defenses. He asked about the scholarship fund and whether his kids would be considered. I said yes. He asked how I had gotten through it. I said, one day at a time. We did not turn toward full reconciliation that night. We did not rush into the comforts of a restored past. But there was a seed of something new. The father didn't change much, at least not publicly. He posted a picture of the event with a long caption that tried to narrate the evening as a tale of reconciliation, starring him in the lead role. It read like a performative footnote to a story he still wanted to own. But he also called me later, off the record, and in that call there was something softer. A memory, an acknowledgement of part responsibility. People are complicated, and my relationship with him stayed that way, woven with love, irritation, sorrow, and an occasional ember of tenderness. When I drove home that night, the town's lights flickered like a constellation of judgments and small mercies. A neighbor flashed their lights in recognition as I passed, someone waved, a few people crossed to the other side of the street. I felt the old impulse to prove myself matched with a newer desire to be steady in who I was regardless of what they thought. The label billionaire turned out to be less an accurate description than a kind of rumor armor. People used it to make sense of a woman they had once reduced to a car bumper. I accepted the image without letting it define me. In the weeks after, the town buzzed with all kinds of conversation, some curious, some gleefully petty. A rumor mill spewed out variations on my origin story. But while chatter makes for easy gossip, it does not change the far more important work I was doing, funding adult education programs, supporting local clinics, and showing up quietly when a neighbor needed help without sending the kind of checks that come with expectations. That, for me, was the point. Money that had once been used to preserve an unsustainable fantasy would now be used to expand people's actual options. I learned over the years how to manage the odd prestige of public success with private care. I hired people who did their jobs well, and whom I trusted to treat clients, employees, and my own staff with decency. I kept my personal finances conservative. I met with advisors and lawyers when necessary, not to find loopholes, but to create structures that would prevent me from becoming entangled again in other people's unstable shorelines. When friends asked for favors, I listened and then chose how to respond in ways that preserved my boundaries. Saying yes is easy when you have the means. Saying no is harder because it provokes feelings and sometimes genuine need. But part of the lesson was learning how to say no, and then follow it with a different kind of help. Referrals, resources, or a hand that did not carry the weight of entire lives. I also learned that public success doesn't erase private scars. The ledger remained a private map, folded in a drawer. Sometimes I would take it out and look at the entries, not to score points, but to remember the shape of my commitments and the necessity of boundaries. The plant by the thrift store lamp continued to live stubbornly, breaking my days into before and after with green leaves that refused to be neat. I made room for grief and for gratitude, and for the complicated tenderness that exists between a daughter and imperfect parents. The second reunion became a memory people repeated with different inflections. Some called it the night I arrived like a billionaire. Others called it the night I gave a speech. Others the night I funded a small but meaningful program. And all of them were right in certain ways. The evening was a hinge. It did not owe me vindication, and I did not expect it to. What it did give me was the chance to show up on my own terms, and to do with my life something that mattered to others without collapsing into old expectations. If you are listening and there's a corner of your life where your kindness is being treated like a debt you must always repay, I want to be clear. Boundaries are not cruel. They are a form of love toward yourself that eventually allows you to be better for others. Setting limits is not the same as abandoning people. Sometimes it is the only way to create a safety net that doesn't stretch thin with every new crisis. And if you are standing in a room where people laugh at something small about you, a car, a job, the clothes you can afford, remember that the laugh is often about what they withhold: curiosity, empathy, the willingness to look beyond the visible marker. The truth you carry need not be a weapon, but neither should it be hidden. Documentation, the receipts, the emails, the spreadsheets, are not trophies to wave, but maps to understand how the patterns ran and what you might choose now. I will close with what I have lived. The ledger once helped me see the structure of dependence. The sale of the company helped me buy a life with more choices. The reunion, both the first and the one people remember, helped me understand that dignity is often quieter than spectacle and kinder than revenge. I did not walk into the second reunion simply to watch jaws drop. I walked in to show a different possibility, that you can be generous and firm at once, that you can protect yourself while still offering help, and that sometimes the bravest, most loving thing you can do is to refuse to be the bank of last resort for people who take your constancy for granted. If this story lands for you, if you've been the fixer, the person who keeps others afloat at the cost of your own shore, remember one practical truth: consult professionals, document the facts, and take steps that preserve your safety while being clear with your intent. And if you're thinking about the social consequences, know this: the loneliness that follows boundary setting is often temporary. On the other side of it is room to breathe, to build, and to love in ways that don't drain you. If this resonates, I'd love for you to stay connected. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it, or join the conversation. These stories matter because they remind us that dignity is earned in the quiet choices, not in loud vindication. The rust on an old bumper told one story of me. The life I built afterward told another. Which story will you choose to live?